There's something about an empty interstate at 2 in the morning that makes the world feel unfinished. The road turns into a long strip of darkness stretching past the limits of the headlights, and the hum of the engine becomes the only proof that you're still part of something living. I'd been driving for hours, long past the point where fatigue stops whispering and starts settling into your bones. My eyes burned, my hands felt heavy on the steering wheel, and the cold creeping from the AC vents did nothing to keep me alert. The interstate was almost too dark that night. No moon, no distant headlights, just a black horizon and the thin gray ribbon of pavement my high beams clawed out of the void. I remember the smell inside my car, stale coffee, warm plastic, the faint metallic tang of cold air cycling through dusty vents. Every time a piece of gravel pinged against the undercarriage, I felt it deeper than I should have, like the road was trying to remind me I wasn't alone. I kept drifting toward the shoulder. The rumble strip would shiver the whole frame of the car, a low growl rising through my seat and into my spine. Each time it happened, I'd blink hard, straighten up, breathe deep. Keep going. Just a few more miles before the next rest stop. But a few miles stretched into many. The forest on either side of the interstate felt wrong. Too dense, too tall, leaning in as if listening. The branches looked like fingers frozen mid-reach. The darkness between the trunks was thick enough to hide anything. I remember tightening my grip on the wheel every time the wind pushed through them and made the branches sway. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded like something moving. And then the road ahead changed. At first it was just a shape, a smudge of something pale breaking the perfect line of asphalt. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, leaned forward. For a moment, I thought it was just the fatigue, some wandering illusion of the dark. But the shape didn't move. It sharpened, became real. A small figure, thin, motionless, standing dead center in my lane. I eased off the gas instinctively, confusion pushing back the fog in my head. My headlights washed over the figure, and the pale shape became unmistakable. A child, or something the size of one, just standing there on the interstate at 2 in the morning. The lights illuminated bare feet, dirty and ashen, toes pressed against the cold pavement like they'd been there for a long time. Legs too thin, knees unnaturally stiff. A plain white shirt, torn at the hem, fluttering in the faint wind of my approaching car. Hair dark and messy, hanging like wet strings over a face I couldn't see yet. The closer I got, the more wrong the scene felt. My headlights brightened the empty road around them, yet the shadows around the child didn't move. They clung too tightly, too deliberately, as if hiding something the light wasn't allowed to touch. My foot hovered over the brake, but something inside me hesitated. Not fear at first, but confusion. A child that young shouldn't have been out there. No broken down car nearby. No flashers. No scattered belongings. Just a small, motionless figure waiting in the middle of nowhere. I slowed to a crawl. The car rolled forward with a deep mechanical sigh, tires whispering over the asphalt. The closer I was, the more a cold prickling crept across my arms and neck, like my body understood something long before my mind did. When I was maybe 10 yards away, the figure finally lifted its head. I don't know how to describe the face, because my headlights seemed to distort it, stretching the shadows across the features in a way that made nothing line up correctly. The eyes reflected the light too strongly, like an animal's. The skin looked pale, but not with the softness of a living child, more like the dull sheen of something left out in the cold too long. They weren't breathing, not even a shiver, just standing, staring, watching me crawl closer. My car idled there on the interstate, engine rumbling low, headlights locked on the still figure. The air inside the cabin grew colder, the vents pumping out a chill far sharper than the temperature setting should have allowed. Every instinct I had screamed that the figure wasn't supposed to be there, that something was wrong with the way it stood, wrong with the way the shadows bent around it, wrong with the empty silence pressing in from the woods. I should have honked. I should have reversed. I should have done anything except sit there frozen. But then the child moved. Not a shift. Not a step. It happened in a way my mind still refuses to make sense of. One moment the child stood facing me. The next, without bending, without turning, It was angled just slightly more toward the woods, like reality had skipped a frame, like the world had glitched. A small, jerking motion followed, head tilting, spine bending, limbs contorting in a way that made the joints look loose and soft, like the bones weren't doing their job underneath. The shadows thickened around the feet. The air grew colder still. A pressure filled the cabin, like something unseen was leaning against the car, testing it, pushing. I inched forward, trying to convince myself it was just a lost kid. But the moment the car rolled another foot, the figure snapped its head toward me again. A sharp, unnatural movement that made a sound I heard even inside the car. A crisp, wet crack, like a frozen branch breaking. I stopped breathing. The child's eyes seemed brighter now, reflecting not just the headlights, but something behind them, something deeper and darker. A hollow flicker, like a candle moving inside an empty house. The wind swept across the interstate, carrying a smell that didn't belong out there, damp earth, mold, and something sour, like old water trapped in a forgotten basement. It seeped into the vents, filling the car in slow, creeping waves. And then, the figure started walking toward me. Not with the rhythm of a child, not with the natural sway of arms or the cautious steps of someone afraid. The legs moved, but the upper body didn't. The feet slid more than they lifted, gliding across the pavement as if they weren't fully touching it. I pressed my back hard into the seat, as though it would make the car move on its own. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel. The engine idled louder, as if warning me, go now, get away. But something rooted me there. The figure drew closer. 5 yards. 4. 3. The shadows seemed to follow it, stretching forward like grasping hands reaching for the hood of my car. And then all at once, the figure stopped. It froze only a few feet in front of the headlights. The face lowered again, hair falling forward like soaked threads. I couldn't see the eyes anymore. Only the stillness. Only the silence. Only the cold pressing against the glass. And when the figure finally lifted its head a second time, the face had changed. Not subtly. Not in a way that could be mistaken for shifting light. The features were sharper. Sunken. The mouth too wide now, pulled tight at the corners. The eyes that stared into me no longer reflected my headlights. They absorbed them. Pulled them inward. The air inside the car went silent. No hum. No engine. No wind. Just silence, so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. And then the figure stepped closer. The hood dipped slightly, like a weight had been added to it. Cold crept across the windshield, spreading in patterns like fingers dragging frost wherever they touched. I don't remember taking my next breath. I only remember the sudden, desperate need to get away before whatever was outside decided I wasn't worth keeping alive. My foot slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the asphalt. The headlights bounced wildly as I swerved around the figure, or maybe through it. For a moment, the world blurred. The cold vanished. The shadows peeled away from the edges of my vision. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the interstate behind me was empty. No child, no figure, nothing. But the smell, the damp, basement rot, lingered in the car long after the road was clear. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. By the time I reached the next gas station, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the car in park. I sat there in the harsh overhead lights, breathing air that felt too warm, too human, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. But as I stepped out of the car, I saw something that froze me all over again. On the hood, directly above where the figure had stood, was a single handprint. Small, filthy, and pressed into the metal as if it had been waiting for me to find it. I didn't sleep that night. I still avoid that stretch of interstate. And sometimes, when I'm driving late, long after the road's empty and the darkness grows thick, I swear I can smell that same sour, damp rot again, as if something is trying to catch up, as if something remembers my headlights on its face, and is waiting for the next time I slow down. I had been driving for hours before it happened. The kind of hours that blur together, where the hum of the engine becomes a steady pressure behind your eyes and the white lines on the asphalt look like they're slowly stretching into threads. The night air outside the car felt thick, humid, carrying a smell like damp concrete and old dust that had settled into the cracks of the highway. I remember wiping my palms on my jeans more than once, even though the temperature inside the car wasn't warm. It was nerves, I guess, or just the loneliness of long stretches of road with nothing but the distant hum of semis and the rhythmic slap of my tires. The sky above me was moonless, a deep velvet black with scattered stars barely visible through the low haze. The kind of darkness that makes everything outside the cone of your headlights look like it's waiting. The highway itself seemed abandoned, so empty that at times I checked the rearview mirror just to make sure I was still connected to the real world and not drifting through some forgotten place where people no longer existed. That's when I first saw the reflection. A faint glimmer of blue and red light trembled across my rearview mirror, barely noticeable at first. It looked like the colors weren't even real, more like stains bleeding into the edges of the glass. I squinted, leaning closer. The lights pulsed again, sharper this time, washing the interior of my car in a faint flicker that made the dashboard shadows twist like something alive. A highway patrol car. That's what it looked like, at least. Black and white. Bar of lights on top. The faint outline of a push bumper catching the lamplight from the distant highway poles. I felt my stomach sink. I hadn't been speeding. I wasn't drifting. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, those lights kept coming closer, and instinct made my foot ease off the gas. The air inside the car seemed to thicken. The patrol car stayed behind me at a steady distance, neither gaining too much nor lagging. But the lights, they didn't flash in the usual rhythmic pattern. They pulsed irregularly, almost like breathing. A slow inhale, a sharp exhale, then a pause long enough to make me think they were gone before they flickered back to life. Something about it felt wrong. Highway patrol cars had a certain sound when they activated their lights. A faint mechanical whir, a rising hum. But this one was silent, completely silent. Even with my window cracked open slightly, all I heard was the wind dragging its fingers across the car's frame and the muffled drone of distant highway noises. I kept checking the mirror. Every few seconds, every few breaths. The car behind me matched my speed exactly. The idea of pulling over crossed my mind more than once, but each time something inside me refused. It wasn't logic. Logic said comply. Stop. Wait it out. But the feeling in my chest wasn't logic. It was instinct. Deep, primal instinct that whispered that stopping would be the worst thing I could do. The smell in the car seemed to change then. A faint scent, like overheated metal mixed with something sweet, almost syrupy. I couldn't place it, but it gave me a headache almost instantly, tightening behind my eyes. The patrol car edged closer. The gap between us shrank until the headlights filled the entire rearview mirror in a wash of pale, too white light. It wasn't the warm yellow glow of halogen bulbs or the sharp blue of LED lamps. It was colorless, like light without a temperature. Light without a source. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Then the lights on top of the patrol car surged to full brightness, flooding the highway with a blistering wash of red and blue that painted the asphalt in bleeding colors. My heart hammered. I could see the shadows stretching across the road, long and distorted, as if something was moving beneath the patrol car despite its steady pace. I decided to pull over. Even if it felt wrong, even if my instincts screamed otherwise, I couldn't outrun a patrol car. I eased the vehicle toward the shoulder, gravel crackling under my tires. The patrol car followed, gliding behind me with unnatural smoothness, like its wheels weren't actually rolling but sliding just above the pavement. The moment my car stopped, I felt the weight of silence settle around me like a blanket soaked in cold water. No engine noise from behind. No door opening. No footsteps. Nothing. I waited. My breath fogged lightly against the windshield, even though the air wasn't cold. The smell of that strange sweetness grew stronger, mixing now with something older, something stale and earthy, like the scent of an abandoned room that had been sealed for decades. I glanced at the side mirror. The patrol car sat directly behind me, but something about it had changed. The lights no longer flashed. The colors froze mid-pulse, casting a dim static glow that made the edges of the vehicle look blurred, almost soft. The windshield looked too dark, as if tinted past legal limits, and the interior was drowned in shadow so deep it looked like a void. I waited for movement. None came. Seconds passed, then minutes, long enough for my nerves to burn, then fade into something colder, something quieter. I leaned slightly, trying to peek into the mirror again, but the angle made everything seem distorted. The patrol car looked different in every glance, closer than before, farther, lower to the ground, taller. Finally, my hand reached for the door handle. The moment my fingers touched the metal, the patrol car's headlights shut off. Not dimmed, not faded, shut off. Instant, absolute darkness swallowed the space behind me. Then, as if responding to some unseen signal, my car's engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered violently. The air vents exhaled a gust of cold air that smelled like damp soil and something faintly metallic, as though the highway itself had breathed into the cabin. My hands froze. Every hair on my arms rose. The patrol car behind me made no sound. No movement. No presence except the overwhelming, suffocating sense that something was watching me with perfect stillness. Something that didn't need breath or light or sound to exist. The darkness behind me looked too dense, like it had texture. Depth, a sort of graininess that made my eyes ache to look at. Then the engine of my car roared back to life without me touching anything. I didn't think. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screamed, gravel spitting like sparks as my car lunged forward. The darkness behind me tore open as my red taillights carved through it. For a few moments, I felt a raw, primal terror pulling at my spine, urging me not to look back. But I did. I always do. The patrol car was following again. No headlights. No emergency lights. No engine sound. Just a dark shape gliding down the highway, closing the distance with unnatural ease. The shadows around it seeped outward like tendrils trailing behind. I drove faster. Wind battered the car. The road vibrated beneath me. My hands felt slick on the wheel. But no matter how much speed I gained, the patrol car never changed size in the mirror. Not closer. Not farther. Just fixed, an unmoving silhouette painted onto the night. Then the highway lights above us died one by one as we passed under them. Each pole flickered, then went black, plunging long sections of road into darkness that felt almost liquid. The radio crackled with static, the kind that pricked your skin like tiny needles. My pulse pounded. The patrol car drifted slightly to the side now, just enough for me to see part of its front. The bumper, the grille, the faint shimmer of its badge. The badge looked wrong. Not the design, something else. The metal surface had a warped, melted look in the edges, like it had been exposed to intense heat. No number was visible, just a smooth, almost organic curve. I wanted to scream. The highway stretched ahead, endless, empty. My car shook as I pushed it harder. The engine whined, begging for relief. But the dark shape behind me kept pace with unnatural calm. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Not slowed, not turned, vanished. One moment it filled my mirror like a dark hunger ready to devour the space behind me. The next, the road was empty except for the faint shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt. I drove for another mile before allowing myself to breathe properly. Another few miles before lifting my foot off the gas. Eventually, the highway lights flickered back to normal. The smell inside the car faded. The air warmed slightly. By the time I reached the next rest stop, the night had shifted back to something ordinary, quiet, lonely, harmless in its mundane emptiness. But I couldn't shake what happened. The next morning, after hours of refusing sleep, I asked a local gas station attendant whether any highway patrol had been active on that route during the night. They told me no. Not a single patrol was scheduled. Not one car. Not one officer. Nothing. The highway had been completely unwatched. And yet something followed me. Something that wore the shape of authority. Something that tried to stop me on a night when nothing human should have been out there. And ever since then, whenever I drive alone at night, I keep my mirror tilted slightly down, just enough so I don't have to see what might follow behind me again. I didn't notice the truck at first. Maybe because the night had already wrapped itself around the highway like a heavy blanket, or maybe because the road had that calm, hypnotic quiet that comes after midnight, when it feels like the world is running out of people. I remembered thinking how the air smelled faintly like dry asphalt and cold metal, the kind of smell that creeps in through the vents when the temperature drops faster than the engine can keep up. The highway stretched ahead of me in a pale ribbon, the reflective paint glowing faintly under my headlights. The lines blurred into each other the longer I drove, and the hum of the tires began to feel like a slow whisper brushing against the floorboards. I had been on the road for hours, too tired to think and too stubborn to stop. It was during one of those long blinks, those dangerous ones, where your eyes stay shut for just half a second too long, that I noticed it. A pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. Far back, small, unmoving, just two white dots sitting perfectly still in the darkness. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Trucks traveled this stretch of highway every night. Long-haul drivers trying to chase the next state line. People like me trying to outrun whatever waited for them at home. The lights were steady, low to the ground, probably a semi judging by the wide spread. But something about the way they hovered in place made my chest tighten. Not getting closer, not falling behind. Just holding the exact same distance, like the driver had locked eyes with me and matched every one of my movements. The air inside my car felt colder, not from the AC. It was the kind of cold that comes from noticing something too late. The miles began collecting behind me in quiet handfuls. 5, 7, 10. Every glance at the rear view showed the same two dots, perfectly aligned with the road, never swaying, never dipping, never changing. Most drivers drift slightly on the highway, fatigue, boredom, uneven pavement, but those lights stayed rigid, like they were being held in place. The hum of the tires grew louder in my ears, drowning out even the faint rattle of the loose coins in my cup holder. I could feel the vibrations through the steering wheel, like the road was warning me. Every light post I passed cast a momentary glow across the inside of my car, revealing the subtle tremble in my own hands. The truck followed, mile after mile. When I finally sped up, nudging the accelerator just enough to feel the car lurch forward, the lights behind me stretched and lengthened, and then settled back into their original distance. Exactly the same. No hesitation, no lag, as though the driver had been waiting, anticipating my decision. I tried slowing down, not abruptly, just enough to see if the truck would pass. But the headlights slowed too. Same distance, perfect precision. A prickling sensation crawled slowly across my scalp. My throat felt too narrow, dry like I had been breathing dust for miles. The night around me seemed to press in closer, the darkness thickening around the edges of the road. I cracked the window, hoping cold air would steady me, but all I got was a bitter, metallic wind that tasted like distant rain and engine fumes. 20 miles. The truck stayed behind me the entire time. I began noticing details I hadn't before. The lights didn't bounce the way headlights usually did on uneven highway asphalt. They hovered too smoothly, too steadily. And there was no additional glare from auxiliary lamps or turn signals, just the two white beams, wide and unblinking. Whenever I passed under a bridge or a stretch of roadside trees, the headlights should have dimmed, even for a moment. But they didn't. They cut through the dark like they weren't reacting to the environment at all, like they weren't reflecting off anything. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I could feel my heartbeat pulsing through the rubber grip. The smell of hot engine oil drifted through the vents, my own car working harder than usual, like it sensed something was wrong before I did. At mile 25, the road curved gently to the right. A long, sweeping turn, the kind that forces vehicles to slow down or drift outward. Trucks especially. Their weight pulls them toward the outside lane. I leaned slightly into the curve, and for a moment, the world around me tilted. A soft shift of tires against road, the headlights sweeping dark forest and empty fields. But the lights behind me didn't shift. They moved like they were glued to my car. Like they weren't attached to a physical truck at all. Just two bright orbs following the exact arc of my movement. My breath caught. I lowered the window fully, letting the night spill inside. The wind rushed in icy and sharp, carrying the smell of wet soil and distant pine. But beneath that was something else, something faint and electrical, the kind of smell that comes from old headlights warming up. I listened. No engine, no diesel rumble, no grinding tires, nothing except my own car and the steady whine of air. By mile 30, my nerves were so tight I felt like a single touch would snap them. The highway opened into a long straight stretch, flat, exposed, surrounded by wide fields and patches of dead grass waving in the breeze. I had nowhere to hide, nowhere to turn off. The nearest town was still 15 miles out. The lights behind me brightened suddenly. Not flickering, not changing angle, just brightening. My rearview mirror filled with white light, washing the inside of my car in a pale, ghostly glow. The dashboard reflected a faint shimmer across the windshield, and I could see dust particles hanging in the air like tiny drifting stars. I squinted, leaning forward, my knuckles paling on the steering wheel. That's when I realized what was wrong. Headlights don't brighten like that without getting closer. They don't stretch across the inside of a car unless the vehicle behind is nearly touching your bumper. But the truck wasn't closer. The distance hadn't changed at all. The lights simply grew, expanded, filled the mirror with a solid, white, unnatural glow that didn't act like any headlights I'd ever seen. And then, for the first time, I saw the silhouette of the truck. It wasn't a reflection of another vehicle. It wasn't painted by the moon. It just appeared in the mirror, the way a shape emerges from fog. A huge cab, a long trailer, edges too sharp to be hidden. But the cabin windows, they were pitch black, not tinted, black like something absorbing the light from inside my car. I stared at that empty window, at the darkness that shouldn't have been that dark, and the realization hit with a cold weight that knocked the air from my lungs. There was no driver, not slumped, not hidden, just absent. A hollow cab, an empty cabin, a truck following me with no one inside. The lights pulsed once, a soft flicker, almost like a heartbeat. Something in me broke. I pressed my foot down hard, the engine roaring, protesting as it pushed beyond what I normally dared on a road like this. The dark ahead blurred, the lines on the asphalt stretching faster beneath me. Wind blasted through the open window, numbing my fingers and stinging my eyes. The truck didn't fall behind. The lights stayed exactly where they were. 32 miles. 33. The road ahead offered an exit ramp, small, narrow, barely lit. I jerked the wheel and took it too fast, the tires skidding for a heartbeat. Rubber scraped asphalt, and the smell of burning tire filled the car. The truck didn't follow. I slowed only when I reached the bottom of the ramp, coasting to a shaky stop. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out everything else. I stared at the empty road above, waiting for the glow of headlights. But there was nothing, only darkness. Wide, silent, undisturbed. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I forced the window up, sealing myself inside the car as though that thin layer of glass could protect me from whatever had been behind me. The smell of burnt rubber clung to my clothes, sharp and chemical. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The night felt different now, heavier, like something invisible was still watching, waiting for movement. When I finally gathered enough courage to merge back onto the highway, the road behind me was empty. No headlights, no truck, no sound except the low hum of insects somewhere in the fields. But my rearview mirror felt wrong, too reflective, too expectant. And sometimes, on dark roads when I'm tired and the night feels too still, I swear I see two pale lights hovering in the distance again, unmoving, perfect, patient, waiting for me to drive another 30 miles. I don't know why I still take that stretch of highway. Maybe it's force of habit. Maybe it's because part of me wants to understand what I saw that night. wants to believe there was some kind of logical explanation, something grounded in reality. But every time I picture the yellow glow of my headlights cutting through the empty darkness, it feels like I'm remembering a nightmare someone else lived through. Someone who wasn't me. But it was me, and I remember every detail. The night was colder than the forecast predicted. A thin layer of mist clung to the asphalt, not thick enough to obscure the road, but dense enough to make everything look slightly blurred, like I was driving through someone's breath. The smell of wet earth seeped through the vents, mixing with the faint metallic scent of my old truck's heater. My fingers tapped unconsciously on the steering wheel, chasing the rhythm of the soft crackling coming from the radio. Static. Always static when I passed mile marker 87. I glanced at the clock glowing on the dashboard. A little past midnight. The sky outside was starless, heavy, almost like it was sinking lower with each passing mile. The kind of darkness that doesn't just surround you, it presses in. Then I saw her. At first, she looked like a pale smear at the edge of the road. A silhouette leaning forward slightly, arms close to her body as if trying to hold in the cold. The curve of her shape caught in the narrow reach of my headlights, framed by drifting mist. Something about the way she stood made my stomach tighten. Not fear exactly, more like unease that crawls under your ribs. Travelers get stranded out there all the time, I told myself. Cars breaking down, GPS losing signal, people underestimating how empty that highway really is. I slowed down. The gravel crackled under my tires as I pulled to the shoulder. My beams washed over her, and for a moment she just stood there, motionless, her face turned toward the tree line rather than the road. Her hair hung long and dark, clinging to her clothes like it was damp. She didn't seem injured, just lost, drained, like someone who had been standing in the cold far too long. When she finally turned her head toward me, something inside my chest tightened. Not because she looked threatening, she didn't. Her expression was blank. Empty. Like the calm surface of water right before something breaks beneath it. She approached the passenger side door in slow, dragging steps. Only her steps didn't make a sound. The mist drifted around her, but her feet didn't disturb it. Not even slightly. I told myself I imagined it, that it was just the angle, the lighting, the fog. Anything. I reached across and unlocked the door. The old mechanism clicked loudly in the quiet. She got in without hesitation. The cold came with her, dense, invasive, slipping into the cabin like an unwelcome shadow. The smell changed too. The earthy scent of the night faded, replaced by something faintly sweet yet stale, like flowers left too long on a grave. She settled into the seat with movements that didn't seem quite aligned. Her body turned, but her hair lagged slightly behind, as though caught in a different motion. Her clothes looked old, not outdated, but worn thin in places where fabric should have frayed but didn't. The truck hummed under us as I pulled back onto the road. The headlights stretched far ahead, but the mist seemed to thicken the farther we drove. The engine's steady rumble felt like the only thing grounding me. I waited for her to say something, but she stayed silent. Her head was slightly bowed, facing the dashboard, yet her eyes were fixed on nothing, absolutely nothing, as if she was watching something beyond the windshield. Something I couldn't see. From the corner of my eye, I noticed again. Her feet, resting above the floor. A few inches of empty air beneath them. Not crossed, not lifted, just suspended. My throat tightened. A subtle vibration traveled through the steering wheel as the tires rolled over a seam in the road, but she didn't react. Not even a hint of movement. Her posture was so still it felt unnatural, like she wasn't sitting in the seat, more like she was placed there. I kept driving. The radio's static softened into a low murmur, almost like whispering underwater. The mist thickened. The temperature dropped further. It felt like the truck's heater was fighting something that wasn't just cold, but absence, a void that drained warmth rather than repelled it. Out of instinct, I checked the rearview mirror, and froze. There was no reflection of her in the glass. The seat behind her was visible, clear as day, but she wasn't. I looked back at her directly, and she remained there, unmoving, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The faintest tremor went through her shoulders, but it didn't look like a shiver. It looked like someone remembering something painful. The road ahead stretched into a tunnel of mist, headlights bouncing off the white veil. It was almost hypnotic. A soft hum filled my ears, blending with the static, like a lullaby with no melody. Somewhere between the next few miles, the smell changed. That faint sweetness grew stronger, thicker, more unnatural. Not flowers anymore. Something closer to rot trying to disguise itself as perfume. My stomach twisted. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something above us. Her hair slid across her cheek, but there was no movement of wind, no shift in the cabin's air. I felt her presence, heavy yet empty at the same time. Then the dashboard lights flickered. Just once. Then again. A dimming pulse that crawled across the gauges like a heartbeat skipping. The truck's engine hiccuped, a jarring cough that rattled the frame. Her head slowly lifted. Her face was pale. Too pale. The skin around her eyes was darkened, not from makeup or exhaustion. It looked bruised. Sunken, as if something had pressed fingers into her face and never let go. Her lips parted slightly, and though no sound came out, the temperature dropped another few degrees. Cold washed over my arms and chest, settling deep into my bones. The truck sputtered again. Something flickered in the corner of my eye. Movement outside the window. Shapes in the mist. Shadows that leaned forward as we passed. Dozens of them. Human silhouettes standing along the roadside, just barely visible in the thin veil of fog. Faces blurred, bodies angled toward the truck. Watching. I gripped the steering wheel harder. My palms were damp with sweat, yet the air felt dry and cold. The shapes seemed to pulse closer each time the headlights flickered, like they were stepping forward 1 inch at a time whenever the light dipped. I felt the woman's gaze shift toward me. Not her head, just her eyes. They rolled upward until the whites showed, then slowly regained focus on me. Something about the way she looked at me felt ancient, tired, like she had been sitting in that seat for 1,000 nights before this one. The shadows outside pressed closer. The engine gave one final sputter. Then everything went black. No headlights. No dashboard lights. No engine. Nothing. The truck drifted, silent, gliding through pure darkness. I could feel her beside me, closer now. Her presence felt like a weight pulling inward, like gravity had shifted toward her. My breath came out in short, cold bursts. The smell was overwhelming now, like thick sweetness coating the back of my throat. The darkness outside the windows shimmered. Movement brushed against the glass. Fingertips? Shapes? I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing. I shouldn't have stopped. I should never have let her in. Something touched my shoulder. Not a hand, something colder. Lighter, like the memory of a hand. My vision blurred. A soft hum filled the cabin again. The same whispering static, but clearer. Closer, like it was inside my head. Then, without warning, the engine roared back to life. The lights snapped on. The mist exploded into brightness, scattering into the night like startled birds. I gasped and jerked the wheel. The truck corrected itself on the highway. Headlights steady, dashboard normal, radio humming quietly, but the passenger seat was empty. No trace of cold, no scent of sweetness. Nothing, just the faint imprint of something that should never have been there. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, heart pounding in my throat, eyes locked straight ahead. The mist eventually faded. The night returned to normal darkness. But the feeling remained, like someone was still riding in the truck with me just out of sight. I checked the passenger seat only once more before pulling into my driveway. And that's when I saw it. The floor mat. Pushed slightly forward. Indented by the shape of 2 feet. Except the indentations were several inches above where the mat actually rested. As if the pressure had come from something suspended. Floating. Hovering in place. Her feet had never touched the ground. And I don't think they ever will.